Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
A science story, huh?
These NYU scientists,
I felt
right.
But I was so
And I just thought, well,
I had figured it out.
It was that golden moment.
Because science was on my side.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Story Clatter, where true personal stories about science help us to discover how weird and wonderful it is to exist in this world and be a human. I'm your host, Misha Gajewski, and today's episode, we're exploring the flaws in the healthcare system. From bureaucracy and inefficiencies to miscommunication and lack of data, we're shining a giant spotlight on both sides of the story. Our first story is from Zoe Wisnoski, a former feminist policy analyst turned full-time, still feminist, mother. We're so glad Zoe shared her story with us because her story is such a powerful reminder of the importance of data collection, especially when it comes to rare disease. I think we sometimes forget that at the core of all the advancements in modern science and medicine is robust data. And if we didn't have that data, we'd probably still be treating everything with leeches. Zoe's story was recorded in her home in Minneapolis. Here's Zoe.
I'm sitting in the hospital with my very sick 2-year-old son, Riley. And at this point, Riley's had a constant fever for about a month, which surpasses 102 degrees most days, and twice has read higher than 103. So we take his temperature every diaper change and put it into the baby app and export the data to graph it. So at this point, we have a pretty solid trend line of what his temperatures looks like, and that's important to me. I have always had a need to explain and fix things around me, mostly by using research and data. The doctors are currently calling it a fever of unknown origin, which basically means they have no idea what the cause is. I feel desperate. I would do literally anything just to understand what was happening inside of his little body. And beyond this feeling of complete disorientation, we are quite literally so alone. Riley's fever started 3 days prior to the US lockdown, so we have no support. No hugs from family, no food drops, and no real breaks. It's just my husband, Riley, and myself. We're not even allowed to leave this hospital room. So I'm sitting here talking to the most recent doctor, who is just yet another MD in a long line of confused MDs. And he begins lecturing me on how I need to stop taking my son's temperature. He tells me that I'm going to make myself crazy, as if I'm not already crazy. Riley's sick and no one knows why, and there's nothing for me to do about it. The only tangible help I can offer is this data. It's my control. His suggestion feels like a slap in the face. We leave Children's Hospital after 3 days of testing. Riley's workup is exhaustive and inconclusive. The next month is filled with more fevers, tests, and confusion. Finally, 2 months after fever onset, it's time to rule out cancer. Our intake into hematology-oncology starts with the knowledge that only one caregiver can show up. Thank you, pandemic. And I go because I have this very understanding husband that knows I need to be with Riley for the scary stuff, that I am holding it together by a thread, and I'm too new to this sick kid game to bring a screen for Riley to watch. So this visit is just 90 minutes of pure chaos. My husband's on the phone with a bad connection. I'm chasing Riley, and the doctor speaks in just the quietest of voices. So I leave the appointment understanding two things. The bone marrow draw is scheduled for later that week, and the doctor really doesn't think that he'll find anything based on all the data and all the results that have been collected in the last 2 months. So we have the procedure, and afterwards we go home, and I just feel this rush of relief roll off of me. I was so happy to finally rule out cancer. That word that tugs at your gut. And for whatever reason, while we hadn't gotten the results, I was convinced that this meant that we were past that terrifying possibility. And my mom was there. Finally, she had joined our bubble. And so when we walk in the door, she's making food and comfort, and she sets up Riley with Mickey Mouse. And I had this just urgent need to get outside, to move. It was sunny and beautiful, and it had been months at this point since I'd seen my mom due to COVID. So we took a walk. We left the peaceful house, finally having no worry about stepping out for a moment. And I start talking to her as if I'm this 13-year-old girl, and she's driving me home from sports practice. The magic of the car when the adult shuts up and the stoic, too cool teen finally spills everything, that was me. Manic worry and hope intermixed with the melting of the creek, and the white buds are speckling the ground because spring was starting in Minnesota. And my mom just listened. It's a short walk, but it feels like the start of something good. When we get back, I have a foot inside the door when my loving, gentle husband looks to my mom and says, "You need to get out now." I don't get it at first, and I get defensive. What the hell are you doing? You don't talk to people that way. But I turn to my mom, and she's pale, her skin suddenly matching the N95 she put on before re-entering our house. And it's her look that drops my stomach out from under me. She gets it before I do. She rushes out the back, whispering, "Call me as soon as you can." And things go dark. In part, literally, there is no natural light in our kitchen and the lights are not on, but also just this fear. I can't fully catch my breath, and words start spilling out of Mike's mouth. Words like cancer and leukemia and abnormal findings. And apparently, in the 20 minutes of fresh air that I finally let myself have, the doctor had called, and the world decided to end. Fuck. They think it's fucking cancer. I hear the dial tone as we call him back together. When the doctor picks up, you can tell he's driving, and this is silly, but the wind is in the background, and I get this image of him golfing, that he's somewhere so ordinary, so carefree, and I will never feel like that again. And then he says, "This is never the call we want to make." And that's what I remember, that sentence. The next 10 minutes are taken up with a windstorm of different words and phrases, and the memory of this moment is physical. Snippets of data and horror are rushing around me while I stand in the middle, just completely disconnected. His bone marrow is abnormal. We can't tell if it's ALL or AML, which apparently are two different types of leukemia. Leukemia. This one's more survivable. This one has harsher treatments. And at some point, I try to get the doctor to give me a percentage of likelihood that this is cancer. Because he keeps saying, "We're not sure, but it's probably cancer, maybe." And I don't know how to quantify that. I like numbers, and without them, I just feel like this fish out of water. So I push him, and I take away that they're 80% sure. And I cling to that 80%. There is an 80% chance that my child has cancer. And my mind doesn't compute the 20% of hope unknown. I'm drawn into this world that's a standard deviation from healthy and happy. But then we go on. And he definitely does have cancer, probably, and we need to get him a central line as soon as possible. By the end of the week, we'll know if it's ALL or AML. But either way, he needs treatment to start as soon as possible. And the doctor says, I can get him on the surgical schedule for Friday for a port placement, and then pauses. Unless, that is, you want him to spend the weekend with you. I'm sure we could fit him in on Monday. And my head's very cloudy already, but I pause. Why? Why in the world would the weekend matter? And then I realize it's Sunday is Mother's Day. And is he honestly asking if I want to postpone my child's cancer treatment to celebrate myself? No. No. We do not need to do that. We hang up the phone and there's just silence. I can't even hear Mickey in the other room. It's dark and there are these two statues standing in the kitchen where we just were. And this is when I learned that people handled crises in very different ways. I turn to my husband and I tell him that I am going to go make some calls. Well, at the same moment, he turns to me and says, I'm going to go sit with our son. And while he sits with our loving, amazing 2-year-old son, I walk outside to our deck and I proceed to call every single person I know with any connection to medicine. I call in every favor, old school friends I haven't seen in decades. Is this where we should be now? Will they take the best care of him? Because I keep focusing on the fact that once we start treatment, I don't know if we'll be able to change. And I don't know if that's true, but it is what I cling to with an iron fist all evening. Down the deck, around the hot tub, back to the door. Repeat. Call after call after call. Speckled in with my family. We don't know. There's nothing we can do. Cancer. And I just cling to this until the middle of the night. The doctor calls us the next morning. Lots of words I don't remember, but I leave the conversation with this. 40% cancer, 60% who the hell knows. So chemo goes on hold, replaced by more tests, another bone marrow draw, and more constant fevers. It wasn't cancer, thank God, but we never really found out what the fevers were about. 2 months after that first hospital stay, genetics received the results of their testing. Riley was officially diagnosed with Tatton Brown Rahman Syndrome, something so rare that at the time only 200 people were estimated diagnosed. And with our current knowledge, TBRS doesn't really explain what ended up being 9 months of fevers. Nothing did. Tatton Brown Rahman Syndrome is a diagnosis that sinks my gut. So little is known. And one of the few things that is known with what little data there is that TBRS can impact every part of the human body. So now suddenly all of his medical neurological future is hazy, not just the temperature. And in the face of this, just like complete uncertainty, I have had to figure out how to breathe, how to monitor him without Googling everything and to like focus on his happiness. So I focus on showing him the world and teaching him the importance of adventure, which is just like this founding value of our family. And we camp and we climb and we travel. And through it, I focus on his smile. That is my new goal in life, his smile. Because I learned very quickly that data is a privilege from the rare disease community does not have. But we do have the happiness.
That was Zoe. To learn more about her or TBRS, visit our website, storyclatter.org. Being a storyteller on our stage is just one way to make Story Collider happen, but if standing alone in the spotlight in front of an audience doesn't speak to you, maybe becoming a Story Collider donor might be more your speed. Story Collider donors play a vital role in our ability to bring you this podcast. We're in this together. Story Collider is one big experiment that's designed to connect us around our love of discovery, curiosity, and the natural world. If you believe in the power these stories have and this mission, please donate to the Story Collider at storycollider.org/donate. The most popular level is $10 a month, and you can make your tax-deductible donation at storycollider.org/donate. But really, any level makes a difference, and we're so grateful to everyone who supports Story Collider. Hey, Story Collider listeners. Did you know that by 2025, over 1 billion women will be in menopause worldwide? It's time we had a better approach to women's health after 40. That's where Alloy comes in. With Alloy, you get safe, FDA-approved treatments for your menopause symptoms, all prescribed by menopause-trained doctors. And the best part? You can do everything from your phone. No need for doctor visits or pharmacy trips. They'll even ship it to your door for free. Menopause is inevitable, but suffering doesn't have to be. Go to myalloy.com to start your consult with a menopause-trained expert today. And because you're a Story Collider listener, we have a special offer just for you. Use promo code Collider at checkout to get $20 off your first order at myalloy.com. The offer is good through March 31st, 2025, so don't wait. Head to myalloy.com and use promo code Collider today.
Move your career further, faster in just 2 days with a Harvard Professional and Executive Development Program. Advance your leadership skills, craft smarter business strategies, build your network, and transform how you work and think to keep your career moving forward. You'll earn a certificate and can add Harvard to your resume with Harvard Professional and Executive Development. Learn more at professional.dce.harvard.edu/Spotify.
Our next story is from New York State Department of Health epidemiologist Bryon Backenson. His story is recorded at Caveat in New York as part of our annual fundraiser Proton Prom. And his story is such a fascinating and rare look at what it was like to be heading up the contact tracing efforts during those first stages of the pandemic. Bryon's story gives such a powerful personal point of view of all the challenges and frustrations of being a public health authority that you can't help but be captivated. Here's Bryon.
So it's January 24, 2020. It's about 9 in the morning. I'm sitting in a car in a hotel parking lot in Connecticut. I got my head in my hands. I just drove a rental car into a snowbank. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, what am I going to do with this? I'm thinking of the nightmare of the paperwork that's going to come with wrecking a rental car. I get out, I curse a lot. The airbag didn't go off. That's a good thing. The bumper's hanging off a little bit. I pull the bumper off. I can't push it back on, so I pull it all off, shove it into the trunk, drive to my nearest Enterprise rent-a-car, trade it in for another car, and I'm able to drive home. I kind of kid myself a little bit, and I say it was the sun glare. I think that's what I told Enterprise too. But I think it was the sun glare that was in it. It was early in the morning. It was one of those bright, bright blue skies. There was still snow on the ground. It was really, really bright. I didn't get that good line of sight, and I drove right into the snowbank. But I was also up for 48 hours. I'd been up for 48 hours straight. 2 days earlier, Washington State reported the first cases of COVID-19 in the United States. And at that point in time, I started to get phone calls from providers across New York wondering how they could get their patients tested for a disease here in New York that no one even had a name for quite yet. I'm an infectious disease epidemiologist, among other things. That means I work with outbreaks. It means I try and solve them. I stop them. I try and slow the number of cases down so that we get to the point where there are 2 cases instead of 20 or 200 or 2,000 or 20,000. I've been doing this for about 30 years now at the New York State Department of Health. I've been able to see a lot. I've been able to do some of the minor basic things that you do every day, foodborne outbreaks, waterborne outbreaks. But there have been a lot more as well. There have been ones where things are a bit more exotic. I dealt with the introduction of West Nile virus here in the United States. I've dealt with Zika virus. I've dealt with travelers who have been coming back from countries with Marburg and Ebola. I've dealt with measles outbreaks. I like the job. It sounds a little boring. It sounds a little crazy, but I like the job. I like the job an awful lot. One of the things I really like about it is the fact that you never know what you're going to see or hear about when you pick up the phone or open that email that particular morning. You never know what you're going to get. And you also have the opportunity to prevent other people from getting sick if you do your job well, which makes you feel good about yourself and makes you feel good about society as a whole. Because I've done this for so long, and I still do sort of the daily, everyday work, but I also work with a lot of leadership in the state and in the state health department. I'm part of policy and planning and response that we do. And in mid-December of 2019, I remember bringing up to them about a number of cases of unexplained pneumonia in China and sort of wondering if that would ever come to us. About a month later, they sent me down to JFK Airport, talked with a bunch of agencies about what to do if we had a traveler come back from China who had symptoms of pneumonia and what we should wind up doing with them. A week later, I drove that rental car into that snowbank. Those calls about getting people tested, they came and they came and they came and they came. And I really shouldn't have been surprised about that. New York being a cosmopolitan city, being a travel hub, New Yorkers are everywhere. We could have an outbreak on the other side of the world in the smallest little country, and somehow a New Yorker's there, and somehow I get a call about it. Our first case gets reported on March 1st, which is a lot later than I thought it was going to. It was in a cluster of individuals who went to a party in Westchester County. Our second was a cluster of individuals in the Nassau and Suffolk border on Long Island. And our third was a cluster way out at the end of Long Island. We did what we usually do with these. We try and link them together. We try and tie them together, both internally and see if we can tie them together across clusters. Maybe the best way to think about it is what you see on TV when you see detectives with a corkboard and pictures on them and taking that red yarn and going from place to place and trying to figure out the links between things. But pretty quickly, cases really started to mushroom. And we got to that particular point where you just sort of realize and step back and say, we can't keep up with this anymore. We can't keep up with this number of cases that we're actually seeing. We can't ask questions of them and figure out where they were. We can't see who they were in contact with. Giving up at that stage, sort of so early into it, giving up on a tenet of infectious disease epidemiology made me start to realize that this is something that we were going to be in for an awful lot of cases at that particular point. The other thing I think I started to realize at that particular point in time was that this wasn't just some regular cold or flu. Regular cold or flu doesn't put people in the hospital in this particular rates, and it doesn't kill people at the rates that we were starting to see as well. One of the most sobering times I've ever had in public health was being at a meeting where we were talking about trying to get more refrigerated trucks sent down to the New York City metro area so we could park them in hospitals or near hospitals to deal with the increasing number of fatalities. I remember walking back to my office at that particular point in time, kind of shell-shocked, thinking to myself, I can't do anything to help these particular people, these people that are hospitalized or these people that are about to get hospitalized. But what I could do is try and maybe, hopefully, get them to not get sick in the first place. We were learning a lot about COVID on the fly. We were trying to figure out exactly what, could prevent it at that particular point in time. But if you also remember right, some of the messaging wasn't very good. The messaging was pretty terrible in many ways. And, hearing about things about 6 feet distancing and masking and airborne transmission and flattening the curve. These are all things that I tried to translate and put into nice, good words that I could send to family and friends and those people you call friends on Facebook. Put out those type of posts and see if they could make more of a difference, see if I could get more people interested in and learn a little bit more, and hope that those posts got more traction and spread further and further beyond my original group that I sent them to. A month or so after that, things started to slow down a little bit. We went back to trying to look for clusters of cases and people who were coworkers or at events. We wound up hiring about 7,500 people to do contact tracing. those people would help with regards to looking and trying to, identify some of those contacts and trying to help do what we could do to help them from spreading to other people as well. I would have conference calls with them on Zoom, in some cases daily, most cases weekly. I would try and give them updates on what was going on, allow them to ask me whatever it is that they wanted to, try and remind them of what we were doing and why we were doing it, and try and provide a little bit of empathy as well. I do the same thing for county health departments. They're often a forgotten group of people, but county health departments across the state working tireless hours for as much as we were to try and stop things on their particular level. And then on my staff, I tried to make sure that they were doing well and not breaking under the crunch of working for hours on end and days and days and days with no break at all. I oftentimes felt at that particular point like I was doing more wellness checks than I was doing COVID work. A little bit after that, we started to get vaccines. And we started to get asked about going to and helping at working at vaccine clinics. I was jealous of the people that actually got to go to those vaccine clinics and work at them. It was the first time, I think, since COVID started where the public actually wanted to interact with public health. There was a certain sense of joy at those particular vaccine clinics. People thought that they would get this jab in their arm and we would be able to put this particular pandemic sort of behind us. I think we did that in some ways, obviously not in all ways. I never got to go to one of those clinics other than to get vaccinated myself, obviously. But I did get to do some other things. I worked with Broadway and the Yankees, with Madison Square Garden and with cruise ships, trying to help things reopen. I got to testify for the department in a handful of court cases. One of the things that still boggles my mind is testimony that I did on Zoom in my converted dining room office is now somewhere in the archives of the U.S. Supreme Court. But in general, COVID is still a bit of a blur to me. I've spent an awful lot of time, hearing things and thinking and remembering and saying, oh yeah, I remember when that happened. It happens an awful lot still. At the time, I was still working 14-hour days. And if you work in infectious diseases, you tend to think to yourself, yeah, I can work on adrenaline and I work really well under pressure. COVID is one of those things, I think, that turned into a 3 or 4 year adrenaline rush. But my problem was I couldn't turn my brain off at night. I would try, I'd lay down in bed, I'd start to think about things. I'm a terrible note taker, which is probably a bad thing for someone in my line of work. But the way that I operate is I tend to operate with tons and tons of Post-it notes all over my desk, all different colors and different places and so forth. I would lay there in bed and I would think to myself, oh yeah, there's that one particular thing that I completely forgot about that got buried under 5 different Post-it notes to the left of the mouse. And I would think to myself, man, how can I go back and I got to make sure that that gets done tomorrow. Email was the same. I would think about all the emails that I'd wind up missing. It's difficult to keep up when you're getting over 500 a day. The main thing I think I was worried about was letting people down, and letting people down at such a critical time, such a terrible time in most people's lives. Before COVID started, a few years before COVID started, I'd started this workout thing called rucking. It's now actually gotten a lot more popular, but it basically is nothing more than walking with a big, heavy weighted backpack. During the early days of COVID, I used to ruck a lot during conference calls. But once we started to shift to, Zoom and WebEx and Teams and so forth, and you were always on camera, it was a little difficult to do it then. But I would go out at night now, and I would do most of my rucking then. I'd strap 50 pounds onto my back. I'd go walk 5 or 6 miles, mainly to try and exhaust my body, so that my exhausted body could help override my excited brain, and I could hopefully wind up going to sleep. My wife was incredibly understanding during this. She'd see me, strap on at 10, 11 o'clock at night, put my little headlight on, go out, come back 2 hours later, collapse into bed, get up for the next conference call at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., start the whole process all over again. Eventually, with the variants and the Greek letters and more vaccines, we got to the point where things seemed like they were getting back to normal, or maybe it was a new normal. But I guess the question comes, did COVID win? I stopped doing those Facebook posts probably about a year or so into COVID. I just didn't want to fight people on the internet anymore. In the beginning, you got great feedback from those, but now it was just nothing more than a fight and people picking and coming at you as to whether or not your experience mattered anymore. I think it started to reflect a little bit of what we may be starting to see in society, and it's trickled into more than just COVID. Public health is a field that requires cooperation and honesty from the public in order for us to do our job and do our job well. It's really difficult to try and figure out a foodborne disease outbreak if people don't return our phone calls and tell us what they actually ate. Vaccine preventable diseases are starting to make a big comeback now. We're seeing more cases of measles and mumps and pertussis and now polio, all because of the distrust in vaccines. We have elected officials who don't believe in evidence-based prevention for disease. We have a number of public health officials who sometimes actually actively encourage the public to not cooperate with public health authorities. On one of the few days off I had during COVID, my wife and I went up to the Adirondack Experience Museum in Blue Mountain Lake. In one of the buildings there, I happened to stumble into an area that had an exhibit about the Adirondacks in World War II. I'm sure there was a lot more in the exhibit, but the thing that really that comes to mind, the thing that mesmerizes me about it, were the posters on the walls. The posters that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, I Want You from Uncle Sam, or the ones about war bonds and so forth. The ones that really struck me were the ones about victory gardens and the ones about saving your bacon grease so the glycerin could get used to help make more bombs. These posters are classic marketing. In some cases, you may call them propaganda. But the reason they were done is to try and get the public collectively around solving a particular issue, to keep morale up. They were incredibly successful at that. Victory gardens were everywhere. I looked at those posters. They're more important to me now than they are when I first heard about them in history class back in high school. I actually look at them and they make me angry. They make me angry because in World War II, for many, many years of World War II, we were involved and collectively together as a country working to solve a particular problem and bring people home as quickly as we possibly could. With COVID, that collective action lasted 4, maybe 6 weeks or so before things got really, really, really bad. So in the end, I sort of have to ask, is it me? Am I broken? Is public health broken? Public health has always had this thing that we call the Goldilocks problem. I guess that I call the Goldilocks problem. I don't know that I've ever heard anybody else talk about it that way. But it's basically where the public and the press say that basically public health did too much or they did too little, but they never did it just right. It's one of those things that public health has dealt with for years and probably will continue to deal with forever. It certainly got exacerbated and magnified during COVID. I'm starting to try and think about things with a little bit more perspective, though, as well. My wife and I, for our anniversary, this past April, we went to the Redwood National Park in the most northern area of California. When you stand in front of those trees, when you look up at them, when you touch them, you realize those trees, they're 2,500 years old. They give you a whole new perspective on time. Then I think about COVID. And I think it's just been 4 years, just a shade more than 4 years now since when we really started to deal with COVID. So maybe I just have to give it a little bit more time. And in the meantime, you'll find me at night walking around with a bag of rocks on my back. Thank you.
That was Bryon. To learn more about him, visit our website, storyclatter.org. Our website is just one way to connect with Storyclatter, but there's so many other ways, and we hope you'll use them all. You can always follow us on social media. We're on X, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Head to storyclatter.org to become a financial supporter. Or if you want to come to one of our shows, start your own story clutter show in your community, or even learn how to tell your own science story, you can learn all about that on our website too. This podcast is produced by me, Misha Gajewski, along with Jen Chen, Nikisha Roberts-Washington, and Aaron Barker, Executive Director and co-founder of The Story Clatter. The stories featured in today's episode were produced by Kayla Glynn, Richard Kemeny, Tracy Segarra, and me, Misha Gajewski. Special thanks goes out to Story Clatter's board and team. Our theme music is by Ghost, and next week we're exploring all the weird and wonderful ways technology connects us, for better and for worse. Trust me, you won't want to miss this episode. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.